Tonight, police say a violent attack inside an Ontario university was motivated by hate.
It's very upsetting.
A professor and 2 students stabbed, their class on gender identity targeted. After a year of searching, police are able to identify a little girl found dead in a dumpster.
She would have been just shy of her 5th birthday.
Where the investigation goes now. Remembering Sue Johanson.
What does an old lady like me know about sex?
The Canadian who brought straightforward sex advice to TV.
She was never judgmental, nor was she condescending.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Tonight, students, faculty, and the wider community at the University of Waterloo are coming to terms with a vicious mass stabbing that police say was motivated by hate. On the campus, about an hour from Toronto, this is a time of fear and solidarity after police say a former international student at the university entered a gender issues class and attacked with 2 large knives, seriously wounding the professor and 2 students. Ithil Musa has more on the attack, the detail that quickly led police to deem it a hate-motivated crime, and how the campus community has unified against it.
Students at the University of Waterloo are still in shock after what police are calling a senseless act of hate.
Having that happen literally the building over, I'm still a bit shaken from it, honest.
You hear stories on the news of stabbings and stuff in different places, and you think that's so far removed from me and my world.
Police say the suspect walked into a classroom filled with about 40 students and asked the professor what was being taught. It was a second-year philosophy course on gender issues.
Good afternoon.
And authorities say that played a role in the attack that came next.
Investigators have reason to believe that this was a planned and targeted attack motivated by hate related to gender expression and gender identity.
Police say the suspect, armed with 2 knives, attacked Professor Katie Fulfer and 2 students. All 3 victims sustained serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Police say there's been a recent uptick in incidents targeting the LGBTQ community in the Waterloo region.
It's very upsetting.
Waterloo resident Sarah Scott says she brought an LGBTQ flag to campus to show her support for the community and to stand up against hate.
It was still done as an act of terrorism to terrorize the trans community, the queer community, women at large. So this was an act of terrorism.
Police say the suspect is Giovanni Villalba Aliman, a 24-year-old international student who had been studying at the university. He is now facing numerous charges, including aggravated assault and assault with a weapon.
We are united.
At a gathering with students and faculty, the university president was defiant.
There are those who would like to intimidate us. They want us to be afraid to learn, afraid to share, afraid to speak our truths. But we will not let them deter us from proclaiming loudly our values of inclusion and openness.
If the police are pretty clear about the motivation here, but there's still a lot we don't know about the suspect.
Absolutely, Adrian. Police say Aliman does not have a criminal record and they're not aware of any online threats, but they do believe he acted alone. Right now, they're in the process of searching his home. Police also say that when they initially arrived on scene, Aliman tried to blend in with the crowd, posing as a victim. However, they say they were able to apprehend him quickly based on the descriptions they received from witnesses.
Ithil Musa, thank you. After more than a year, police have finally identified a young girl whose body was found in a Toronto dumpster. But Thomas Daigle explains they still don't know how she died.
Police now have a name, but still few answers about what happened to 4-year-old Nivea Tucker and how her remains ended up in this dumpster over a year ago.
The pathologist wasn't able to identify a cause of death. This could still potentially become a homicide case.
The case shocked Toronto when police announced an unidentified girl's remains were wrapped in these blankets and left behind in a plastic bag. At first, investigators relied on dental records and looked through missing persons files, but it was newly developed genetic genealogy and a recent tip from the public that proved crucial.
And we're very grateful to the person who did call in and provide us with that information. It gave us that little jigsaw puzzle piece, and we were able to build from there.
Last month, a local Presbyterian church community honored the girl, each member wearing a scarf to remember her, 1 year after Nivia's remains were found.
Every child deserves a name. Every child deserves to leave this earth with dignity.
Now the church minister says he's relieved police have answered one key question.
And I was really deeply moved, but so grateful, very, very grateful that at least now we know who she is.
Investigators say they've spoken with Nivia's mother in Toronto, but have not found the girl's father.
I won't comment on the status of her mother in our investigation.
They've made no arrests and laid no charges.
Police won't say who provided the crucial tip, but they say the information wasn't specific and initially led them to the wrong name before they identified Nivia. Investigators say her remains were dumped just days before her 5th birthday. Thomas Dagler, CBC News, Toronto.
Google says it is planning to block Canadian news content from its search engine. The decision is a counterpunch after the federal government passed a law that would make tech companies pay for sharing articles. Rafi Boudjikanian breaks down what this could mean for your access to your news.
Right now, every news article is just a Google away, but soon that could change, with Google now threatening to pull Canadian news links from the search engine following through on a warning.
If C18 is passed in its current form, it may affect our ability to provide products and services.
Google is pushing back against a law that would force tech companies to pay news organizations, including CBC News, for each story accessed through its site. For the federal government, it's a way to make tech giants pass on some of the ad revenue to media outlets, not how Google sees it.
We send millions of visitors to their sites for free.
So what would this look like? This page you see now, mostly full of Canadian outlets about this very story, none of them would show up once the company makes its move.
Bully's bully, and this is such a bully tactic.
Michael Hollett runs a music magazine. He's concerned smaller publications would be hit hardest by the ban.
Unfortunately, we've got to stare them down on this because we can't give in to this kind of a tactic. I mean, they have been able to do whatever they want forever.
Other observers say Ottawa should have seen this coming, and this legislation was no way to save the industry.
The news organizations rely on the incoming traffic, and most people are discovering that either through social media sites or through a search engine like Google.
Google is now joining Facebook. Its parent company Meta announced last week that it too will block Canadian news content. The government says it won't waver, but it's still willing to talk.
A lot of organizations are suffering and have been suffering for a long time because 80% of all the revenues are going to two companies, Google and Facebook. That's what we're trying to balance through the bill. So we're looking at all the options.
Rafi, I'm thinking about the implications here. If all Canadian news gets dropped from Google, what's left?
Adrian, you would not be blocked from accessing foreign news services covering Canada. That said, there is a real concern about the lack of local news, of verified journalism, and what could fill that void. The legislation, though, has not passed yet. The Canadian government says it needs to get through regulations, and that's where it sees room for negotiation with the tech giants. Minister Rodriguez told me he spoke to Google on Thursday, and he expects to do that again next week.
All right, Rafi Boudjikanian, thank you. There's been a major shift in the United States tonight after the Supreme Court struck down race-based admissions programs at colleges and universities. As Katie Simpson shows us, some say the move has killed affirmative action, rolling back decades of progress.
The U.S. Supreme Court has just altered the future of millions of American students, upending decades of precedent, triggering heated and polarized reactions. In its 6-3 decision, the conservative majority declared affirmative action programs at colleges and universities unconstitutional, siding with advocates who argued giving priority to Black and Hispanic applicants discriminates against white and Asian students. With Chief Justice John Roberts writing, the student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race.
The affirmative action policy definitely impacted me and people I know.
Calvin Yang is Asian Canadian and has been one of the loudest activists fighting for this change.
For now, policymakers should focus more on how to maintain that diversity without race-based emissions.
The justices opposed to the ruling delivered a scathing dissent. Sonia Sotomayor wrote, "It will entrench racial segregation in higher education because racial inequality will persist so long as it is ignored." Educators are now figuring out what to do next.
I'm really most worried about, the youth and the students younger than us in high school and middle school and elementary school who might not get the same opportunity that I did.
Good afternoon, folks.
The president has ordered the Department of Education to find ways to abide by the law while still encouraging diversity.
We cannot let this decision be the last word.
Joe Biden didn't hide his frustration with the conservative majority on the court after delivering yet another decision that will bring about seismic change to American society.
Is this a rogue court?
This is not a normal court.
Another significant decision arrives Friday. The court will rule on protections for the LGBTQ community and whether a business can refuse service based on religious or other objections. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Montreal is canceling its Canada Day fireworks show and shutting down outdoor sports facilities as wildfire smoke continues to hang over the city, affecting air quality. The La Ronde Amusement Park is also canceling the first night of an international fireworks competition, worried it would just make the air quality worse. That smoke continued to choke parts of the eastern U.S. Detroit, Philadelphia, and Washington among the cities dealing with dangerous levels of pollution. CBC News senior meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff is with us now. So, Joe, the smoke has been so severe, the air quality so bad. Can you put this in context? Have we ever seen anything like this here before?
Yeah, Adrienne, for this part of Canada, it's hard to find an event on record that compares to what we're seeing this season. And, here in BC, we're getting more used to having wildfire smoke a part of our environment as our wildfire seasons grow in intensity. Just last fall, Vancouver was ranked the worst air quality in the world. But as far as places like Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, this is unprecedented, Adrienne.
And so summer has really just barely begun. Is this what it's just going to be like?
Those Quebec fires not expected to go anywhere anytime soon. They could be burning right through to September, October. They don't have any obstructions or obstacles in place. There's lots of fuel to burn, and the forecast for the summer is hot and dry. So it's likely anytime we get those northwesterly winds, we'll see that smoke spill down once again across the lower Great Lakes. And with a warming climate, this is expected to become more common. So we will be at the whim of the winds for the months to come, I'm afraid.
Okay, Joe, thank you. You're not getting away from us quite that easily. I know this is your last day before mat leave. We all wanted to wish you congratulations and wish you the best, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you, Adrienne. Yes, I won't be tracking the winds, but I'm very excited. Thank you.
So we'll certainly miss Johanna, in part because the extreme weather is just not letting up, including in parts of the U.S., which are dealing with severe heat causing dangerous conditions for nearly 60 million people. The worst of it is in the south, where daytime temperatures feel upwards of 40 degrees. Already multiple deaths have been recorded. The extreme heat is being caused by a weather phenomenon called a heat dome, which traps hot air inside of a region for an extended period of time. Now, just 2 years ago, British Columbia faced a heat dome as well, with some deadly consequences. But the toll wasn't felt equally. Bethany Lindsay now with why some were more vulnerable.
In this low-income Toronto neighborhood, volunteers are preparing residents for the heat.
In the 60s, when they designed all these buildings, so basically the whole idea was to keep the heat inside.
The outside is around 30, then it can reach around 35 inside the room.
People who live in these types of buildings are particularly vulnerable. New research into BC's deadly heat dome found that poverty was the biggest risk factor. More than 600 people died over about a week in 2021.
Am I allowed to cry in this interview? I'm scared of summer. And I'm not scared for myself.
An unpublished study suggests people on government income assistance died at a disproportionately high rate during the heat dome.
That was the biggest risk factor for mortality during the heat dome.
That's no surprise to scientists who study climate change.
It's going to really exacerbate existing health disparities, and that we really need to buckle down and start to take this seriously.
Other people talk about the things they're excited for summer. They talk about going swimming, going to the beach. I think about who in my community is going to die.
Temperatures hit more than 40 degrees in Chilliwack during the heat dome. Q Lawrence gets by on disability assistance. They couldn't afford air conditioning.
Honestly, felt quite trapped for much of that time. There was a lot of time sleeping on the kitchen floor.
They say governments need to set maximum allowable indoor temperatures and fund air conditioning for poor and disabled Canadians.
There's the idea that air conditioning units are bad for the environment, and to that I say disabled people's lives are not on the chopping block.
The BC government says it's funding about 10,000 units for low-income households, but critics say that's not nearly enough. There are more than 380,000 people living in poverty in BC. Bethany Lindsay, CBC News, Vancouver.
To Iraq now, where hundreds protested outside the Swedish embassy, with some people even getting inside the compound. So they're angry after a copy of the Quran was burned, then stomped on outside a mosque in Stockholm on one of the most important days in Islam, Eid al-Adha. Swedish police say the protest was allowed as freedom of speech, but are now investigating whether the action incited hatred. In France, a third night of violent protests is underway over the police killing of a teen. Just outside of Paris, a curfew is in place and some transit services have been suspended. Chris Brown shows us the outrage and the attempts to contain it.
French cities, and especially Paris's suburbs, are again combustible. Cars were set ablaze and tear gas wafted through what started off as a tense but peaceful march Thursday, led by the mother of 17-year-old Nael. Police shot him dead at a traffic stop Tuesday, the third such police shooting this year. Police think they're omnipotent because they feel as though they can kill a young person from a working-class neighborhood without being bothered, said this resident. Initially, police claimed the shooting was in self-defense, but that was contradicted by this video. It shows the officer firing as Nael drove off. He kissed me goodbye, his mother said in a video on TikTok. He said, "I love you, Mum," and an hour later I was told that someone shot my son. More than 180 people were arrested after protests grew Wednesday night. French President Emmanuel Macron, at a crisis cabinet meeting, said he shared the community's grief, but also that the violence must end, and put an extra 40,000 police officers on duty.
The French police is the deadliest one on continental Europe.
This activist says a record 13 men, most of them black or of Arab descent, were killed last year because of a change to the law that lowered the threshold for French police to fire their weapons.
If in case you refuse to stop when the police summons you, you have the right to shoot them, even to shoot to kill. And that is why we have seen a dramatic rise.
D'homicide volontaire.
French prosecutors say the officer who shot Nael is now under formal investigation for voluntary homicide. Macron's unpopular government is trying to keep a difficult balance. Protesters are furious, but his government can't afford to alienate the powerful police unions, whose members so often of late have been asked to restore the peace after violent protests in French cities. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
There are reports tonight that the World Health Organization is preparing to designate aspartame as a possible carcinogen. In other words, one of the most widely used artificial sweeteners in the world could cause cancer. But as Cam McIntosh shows us, the actual risk is far from clear.
Around these food trucks, no one's pretending these soft drinks are all that healthy.
Do I know this is terrible for me? Yes.
But cancer-causing? When it comes to drinks and foods with aspartame sweetener, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, part of the World Health Organization, reportedly will say potentially, calling for more study. Aspartame, which appears most commonly in diet soft drinks, was developed as an alternative to sugar in 1965. By 1981, it was approved for use in Canada. In the decades since, it's been under almost constant study. Over the years, there have been links to stroke, dementia, obesity, but it's kept the approval of global food safety regulators.
Aspartame I think, is somewhat the poster child for all things artificial and in terms of artificial sweeteners.
Nutrition professor David Ma has followed a lot of it. While he says it's a stretch to call aspartame healthy, most evidence suggests
risk is low because you have to be consuming an enormous amount of aspartame to cause injury to yourself.
We have more than 100 safety studies available to support its safety.
The soft drink industry, of course, is taking issue with all of this.
Agencies specifically charged at looking at food safety have evaluated aspartame many, many times and have consistently deemed it to be safe as a food ingredient.
Health Canada says it stands by its approval, but will review the WHO's findings. Meanwhile, classing aspartame, a potential carcinogen, deems its prolonged risk about the same as radio waves from mobile phones and less risky than red meat. Perhaps not all that persuasive, but says Ma, likely to spark even more research.
I think we'll continue to talk about aspartame and also many other types of artificial sweeteners,
giving consumers something to sip on for years to come. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The woman who taught millions about sex, Sue Johanson, has died.
How do you feel you would perform in bed with two females?
Remembering the TV host who never shied away from a tough question.
TikTok is a grave threat of foreign influence in American life.
We go inside TikTok's new center they hope will quell the concerns.
ByteDance is not a Chinese company. They are a global company.
Headquartered in Beijing, subject to Chinese laws.
And a little girl's message is found halfway around the world.
I wrote the letter on October 3rd, 1988.
We're back in 2. So that is Virgin Galactic's first flight of paying customers finally taking off more than 15 years later than founder Richard Branson had predicted. It flew more than 80 kilometers above the Earth, touching the edge of space and returning after about 72 minutes. Some 800 people are waiting to cash in on flights. They are not cheap, nearly $500,000 US per seat. Now, Sue Johanson, this woman is being remembered tonight as someone who didn't just change the conversation around sex, she ignited it. Never bashful or judgmental, she spent decades doling out blunt advice on radio and TV. As Nick Purdon shows us, Canadians adored her for it.
How do you feel you would perform in bed with two females?
Well, I personally think I'm pretty good.
Sue Johanson, grandmother, nurse, sex educator.
One size fits all. Relax, guys, you're covered.
Since 1982, she answered Canada's questions about sex. Any question you could imagine.
I want to know how old you have to be to have an abortion.
Johanson began on radio in Toronto. She said there was a simple reason why her callers told her things that they'd never tell anyone else.
Because they're desperate. They can't find anybody else that they can really open up to, who will trust, who will not put them down.
Johanson was trained as a nurse in Winnipeg by nuns who wouldn't talk about sex. She soon learned that Canadian teens didn't know very much about it, or contraception. She started the very first high school birth control clinic in the country.
I figure I've got about 15 seconds to establish credibility, to prove to you that I know what I'm talking about. I've got a question.
Johanson soon had her own syndicated TV show, and at her peak, she taught about sex in more than 20 countries and in 5 languages. She became a celebrity. But to Canadians, Sue Johanson was always our sex lady.
She has been a strong, successful advocate.
In 2001, she was awarded the Order of Canada.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Johansson's final show aired in 2008, but she never stopped taking questions. Now she is being remembered fondly by her fans and her family.
I think at first it was a little awkward when my sister and I were both young. We were a bit awkward about it, but then as we got older, I think our pride just grew and grew, and then we just became so proud of this amazing mother.
Sue Johanson was 93. Nick Purdon, CBC News, Toronto.
She was so cool. Next, TikTok content creators are increasingly worried that the app will be more widely banned because of its ties to China.
I never thought I'd have to say this, but TikTok's dying and we need a plan to save it.
We get exclusive access to TikTok's new office they hope will indeed save it. But is it only for show?
Are you saying that a ByteDance employee who might still be able to access that data would ignore an order from the Chinese Communist Party?
And the fallout after China clamped down on Hong Kong.
You can see the level of fear is very real and palpable.
The National takes you deeper into the stories shaping our world. Next. For months now, TikTok's global success, it does have 1 billion users after all, has competed with the talk of national security concerns. Can its corporate owners based in China resist possible pressure from China's government? Ellen Morrow got exclusive access to TikTok's Los Angeles office for a look at how the company says it is protecting your data.
We're inside TikTok's Los Angeles headquarters.
Welcome. We're very excited that you've come all this way to join us here in LA.
The first ever TV crew to get a tour of its new Transparency and Accountability Center. Open for politicians, experts, and journalists. The social media giant says it wants to show how it all works.
So this explains how and why I would see what I see when I go on TikTok. Exactly.
So millions of videos, filtering it down so people get thousands of videos.
So let's see if we can figure out how to do this moderation.
But all this is a bit of a show. And it's not just about seeming transparent. TikTok is on a charm offensive, trying to prove it's not a threat.
Is the clock running out on TikTok?
Faces growing calls for it to be banned over fears about China's access to user data.
TikTok is under pressure.
And there are concerns that the app can be used for spying or propaganda by the Chinese Communist Party.
Facing a possible all-out ban in the US, concerns over its ownership and potential links to China, forcing it off devices around the world, including any linked to Canada's federal government and all of its provincial ones.
This may be a first step. It may be the only step we need to take, but every step of the way, we're going to be making sure we're keeping Canadians safe.
So you guys know about the TikTok ban?
The threat of more action.
How we use the internet is about to fundamentally change forever, and it's terrifying.
Angering so many who use the app.
If we're going to do something to stop them banning TikTok, now is the time.
A tool for connection, expression, and income with more than 1 billion users around the world.
Okay guys, I never thought I'd have to say this, but TikTok's dying and we need a plan to save it.
It comes down to this. TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a tech company headquartered in Beijing. The concern is a Chinese law that says any organization or citizen shall support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work, meaning companies could be forced to secretly hand over user data. TikTok CEO Shou Chu says that won't happen.
The Chinese government has actually never asked us for US user data, and we will not provide, even if asked.
But ByteDance employees in China have improperly accessed the data of TikTok users, including American journalists, before. A BuzzFeed News report said everything was seen in China. There have also been reports of censorship. TikTok denies them, but they've fueled fears of misinformation on the app.
TikTok is a grave threat of foreign influence in American life.
A lot of risks that are pointed out are hypothetical and theoretical risks.
While TikTok is trying to block off all U.S. user data, its so-called Project Texas, Chu had to admit to U.S. lawmakers in March ByteDance could still access some of it.
Yes or no, do they have access to user data?
After Project Texas is done, the answer is no. Today, there's still some data that we need to delete.
So all that helps explain this.
You're going to see some of our servers which contain source code for the app on TikTok.
A front in TikTok's public relations battle to gain and hold on to trust.
So this station is meant to be what TikTok looks like when you're using it on your phone, and it's programmed with some of the most famous Canadian creators
who use the app to reach a global audience. But this is what we're most interested in, the privacy and security hub.
We're constantly working on iterating and making sure that users are able to delete their data.
Deo Sims, one of TikTok's top privacy lawyers, goes through the app's data protection.
And so we work really hard to employ a series of robust controls, particularly access controls for our internal access for our employees. Unless you have a need for the information, you do not have access to it. So, for example,
that may be a veiled reference, but nothing here directly addresses the concerns around ByteDance or China, a strategy that won't stop questions being asked.
It's an amazing space. We've got an incredible team, so we're happy to show it off and talk about it.
Days later, we go to TikTok's Toronto office to see Steve Dier, TikTok's Director of Policy and Government Affairs in Canada.
Thank you, Senator Housakis and committee members, for inviting me to appear today on behalf of TikTok.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Steve's job is lobbying Ottawa not to take any further action against the app.
My main concern and what drives me is ensuring that our creators who depend on TikTok for their livelihood are going to continue to be able to use it to promote themselves as creators, artists, or small businesses.
what strikes me the most here is that there is this trust deficit that you have to overcome. You know, you could have transparency centers, you could speak to the media, but at the end of the day, you still have this issue, which is ByteDance ownership of TikTok. So how do you possibly overcome that?
Yeah, ByteDance is not a Chinese company. They are a global company.
Headquartered in Beijing, subject to Chinese laws.
They're incorporated outside of China. The CEO sits in Singapore.
If the Chinese Communist Party went to ByteDance and they said, well, we listened to the testimony on Capitol Hill in March. We know that you still have access to some of this foreign data. We want it under this national security law. Are you saying that ByteDance wouldn't comply with that?
That's correct. We've never provided user information, user data to the Chinese government.
But I'm asking about ByteDance. Are you saying that a ByteDance employee who might still be able to access that data would ignore an order from the Chinese Communist Party?
They wouldn't have access to that data. We have our user data for Canadians is stored in the US, Singapore, and Malaysia.
Even if everything that you're saying is true, can you understand why there is this level of concern?
We definitely understand that there's scrutiny of TikTok and that we need to, again, go above and beyond in how we're addressing that. And we're at the table in Canada, and if there are specific concerns that the Canadian government has about TikTok, we want to understand them so that we can address them.
We reached out to Ottawa, and in a statement we're told there are concerns about the applicable legal regime that governs the information collected, and Canadians must make an informed decision based on their own risk assessments.
I mean, I don't have it on my phone. My family and friends who ask, I don't advise it.
Sam Andry is an expert in cybersecurity policy at Toronto Metropolitan University. While TikTok may be Canada's fastest growing app, Andry's research shows it's also the least trusted.
If it is possible that this information and data could be shared with China and be part of kind of their surveillance apparatus, you know, it's not worth the risk, essentially.
But back in California, on the campus of UCLA, some argue all this TikTok trouble is overblown.
This idea of data crossing borders and data being unsafe, it's not unique to TikTok.
Sarah Roberts, a professor focusing on social media, says all apps need better regulation, not just TikTok.
What's going on with the data collection? What's going on with protecting users from AI that is promoting incorrect information? And maybe the focus on TikTok will open up some of those conversations, but I'm worried that it will become a narrow kind of inquiry. I mean, a lot of the criticism is correct, but we can't be in the dark and pretend like there isn't this aspect to it that is deeply xenophobic and kind of coming from that as well.
So if you want TikTok to stay around, please write to your congressmen and women.
TikTok may be facing more pressure now, with simmering tensions between the West and China.
Saying China a bunch of times does not an argument make.
But it's become so deeply entrenched, experts say it likely isn't going anywhere.
It's just been amazing to watch people create things, to learn things. This app means so much to me.
As Ellen noted, Canada's government says it is watching TikTok closely, but the state of Montana has seen enough. It has banned the app. Recently, some users launched a lawsuit calling that decision unconstitutional, and now we're learning TikTok is bankrolling that fight. Well, concerns about China's control is not just a debate, but a reality for people in Hong Kong.
If you do cross the line, then you could be arrested.
The shadow cast by Beijing. Next. Well, this is well-known Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Alexandra Wong, one of dozens detained by police earlier this month for attempting to mark the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. So that and many other forms of public demonstration are now illegal in Hong Kong. 3 years after the territory passed its Beijing-backed national security law, Sasha Petrusek shows us Hong Kong has changed, but some are still fighting.
On the edge of Hong Kong Harbor, an unusual ceremony. Martial arts experts lead, children follow. Set to music glorifying the city's police, celebrating a law that's cast a pall over Hong Kong. China's harsh national security law, cheerfully hyped here as a vital safeguard. It's the kind of scene choreographed by the Communist Party that's familiar all over mainland China. But until recently, out of character in a Hong Kong that's seen itself as more democratic.
To a city with a lot more freedom, with a lot more space to do whatever you want to do, to say whatever you want to say. Obviously, the development has been something which is rather hard to take.
The heart attack is the national security law. Under its sweeping bans on sedition and incitement, courts and jails have filled with government critics and opposition politicians. Media outlets have been closed, most protests banned. Few now dare speak out publicly, especially to foreign journalists.
So you can see the level of fear is very real and palpable.
Emily Lau is a former pro-democracy counselor who says she wants to keep using whatever room for free speech is left just to preserve it.
Try to say things, but be careful not to cross the line, because if you do cross the line, then you could be arrested. Trouble is, you don't know where the line is.
Hong Kong's atmosphere has chilled. Businesses have left their towers. 200,000 have emigrated. Crowds seem thinner on the streets. And the Mandarin of mainland visitors is eclipsing the city's traditional English chatter.
Hong Kong, a city which has long prided itself as Asia's world city, is quickly becoming much more of a Chinese city, a place few would have imagined 4 years ago when millions took to the streets to reject Beijing's growing influence here.
One steamy day that June, 2 million marched peacefully to oppose a plan that would allow China's legal system to reach into Hong Kong.
What are you afraid of? China. Just afraid of China because we have absolutely no confidence in the judicial system of China.
That issue was the spark for increasing confrontation, more aggressive police tactics up against more violent protesters. And street violence was the justification Beijing used to crack down.
Order and security have been back to Hong Kong. We no longer have to worry about being, barricaded, petrol bombs, bricks thrown at us when we go out.
Regina Ip is a member of the Hong Kong government, endorsed by Beijing. And do you think that the fundamental freedoms that Hong Kongers enjoy will also remain?
They will remain so long as they understand that no freedoms are absolute.
Far from it, as many have learned. These days, in the distant outskirts of Hong Kong, Chu Loy runs a community help office. He spent 8 months in jail for organizing an unauthorized gathering. The game's over, he says. No more criticizing the government in public. Chu's crime was to try to organize a candlelight vigil for those killed in Beijing's 1989 crackdown on Tiananmen Square protesters, a vigil allowed here annually before the security law was invoked. Ever since, police detain anyone who tries to mark it.
You're not worried about talking to me today?
Even though I am fear, but I think I have a chance. I have to express my opinion.
Indeed, he says, in offices, neighborhoods, and living rooms, the conversations go on as people find private ways to protest.
I believe the struggle or the social movement is continued in this level. That's why I still keep in this office for the community service. Yeah.
Hong Kong's future may be unclear, though many activists believe they can wait out Beijing, that its tightened grip may loosen as political stability sets in. A new normal as the former British colony gets on with life under tighter control by another distant power.
So, Sasha, it's interesting seeing the activists in your piece. They assume some risk when they sit down to talk with you. How did they navigate that?
First of all, they have to know they trust you. But beyond that, they use very well-chosen words. Still, there is nervousness. There's an undercurrent of tension, especially for these kinds of activists, as you say. They protect themselves to some extent by making it clear that they don't support things that are red lines for China, separatism for Hong Kong, violence. But in the end, they know the knock on the door could come at any time.
You were the last CBCer in there, I think, just before the pandemic. So when you go back now, what stands out the most for you?
It is a much diminished place. As both of us know, Hong Kong has always been one of the sparkling gems of that part of the world, very vibrant, very energetic. That has dulled. It doesn't exist to the same extent. People feel that there is a palpable change. I felt it too. Even though it looks the same, it doesn't feel the same. It's not the same Hong Kong.
All right, Sasha, thanks for coming in. Next, the message in a bottle discovered 3 decades later.
You never in a million years can write this story, let alone happen to you.
How it was found more than 4,000 kilometers away in our moment. Well, that's pretty terrible. This mess is just some of the trash that has washed up on the coast of a remote Norwegian island, and teams are painstakingly working to clean it up. So remarkably, amongst the piles of garbage, 2 men took the time to look inside one ordinary plastic bottle. What they found is our moment.
Eli found a bottle, and then Trim and Eli opened it and found this letter from 1988. So it was just, "My name is Jennifer, I'm 8 years old, please write back to me." My sister-in-law, who's from Nova Scotia, she said, like, East Coast is really small. If we put a Facebook post, I bet we can find her.
In an hour, I was contacted on Facebook. It took 1 whole hour to find me. We threw it in the ocean in Topsail Beach in Newfoundland, and it was found in like the upper northern part of Norway. So I was 8 years old. I wrote the letter. on October 3rd, 1988.
I remember thinking, how has an 8-year-old got such beautiful handwriting? This is crazy.
I was just in complete shock. I couldn't believe that somebody almost 35 years later found this letter.
It was a plastic bottle as well. So how a plastic bottle has survived 35 years and a readable letter.
It was overwhelming, I gotta say, but wonderful and heartwarming. So all those things.
So there's something else, though, too. She says it taught her maybe we shouldn't be throwing so much plastic in the ocean if that bottle lasted with a letter intact for 35 years. Also, the whole point initially was to get a pen pal. Now she says it is her 7-year-old who has agreed to become pen pals with those who found the bottle. That is a national for June 29th. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.